Here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the afternoon agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now this show is about your opinion and mine. So it's not always news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that really need to be on your agenda. So with that in mind, here's what we're covering today. The Education Secretary is set to make a statement to MPs on the tragic case of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. We'll be crossing live to the House of Commons imminently. Our girls and young women are receiving a barrage of unwanted images online. What are we going to do to stop what's being called dangerously normalised sexual violence? And as Arthur's tragic case continues to make headlines, we need to talk about at-risk kids. Are the authorities failing vulnerable children? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for news headlines.
Good afternoon, I'm Tamsin Roberts. Here's the news at 4 o'clock. The Prime Minister is pledging £300 million of funding to crack down on county lines drugs gangs in England and Wales. The investment will help treat and rehabilitate addicts. Boris Johnson says recreational users will also be targeted and face having their passports and driving licences confiscated. Under the plans, police will have powers to seize drug dealers' phones and text warnings to their customers.
Those people who are casually, without thought, taking drugs and not connecting their drug usage with the violence and degradation we see in the supply chain to get their cocaine or whatever it is to them, we need to connect them to that, and there needs to be some consequence that makes them change their behaviour.
A major government investigation has been launched into the circumstances surrounding the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. The Education Secretary is due to address MPs in the Commons shortly. The Attorney-General has also launched a review into the sentences given to the couple who killed him. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life for his murder. His father, Thomas Hughes, has been jailed for manslaughter. Safeguarding experts say the whole system of child protection needs rethinking.
Safeguarding will only work if we work together, and that is so true. We need to work together in safeguarding. It's not just about reviewing. We need to actually put in place practical measures to ensure that practitioners can join up and have further oversight.
Tudholm Primary School in Scotland has been forced to close for a week following a suspected outbreak of the Omicron variant. It comes after one of the AstraZeneca vaccine creators, Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, warned future pandemics could be more contagious and more lethal. She's also urging caution over the new COVID variant, which could be more resistant to both current vaccines and natural antibodies.
Truth is, the next one could be worse.
It could be more contagious or more lethal, or both. We cannot allow a situation where we have gone through all we have gone through and then find that the enormous economic losses we have sustained mean that there is still no funding for pandemic preparedness.
Thousands of people still without power after Storm Arwen hit 10 days ago are now bracing themselves for more bad weather. The Met Office has warned Storm Barra will hit the UK tomorrow. Yellow wind warnings are in place across England and Wales. Yellow warnings for snow are in place in southern and western Scotland. Former Premier League footballer Joey Barton has been cleared of assaulting a rival manager. He was accused of pushing over the former Barnsley boss Daniel Stendhal in a tunnel 2 years ago, leaving him bloodied with a broken tooth. The jury at Sheffield Crown Court took under 2 hours to find Barton not guilty. The former leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been jailed for 2 years for inciting dissent among the country's military rulers. She was initially given a 4-year term, but the country's military leader has cut the sentence in half. She and her National League for Democracy party were removed from power in February in a coup. The ruling is the first in a series of cases brought against the 76-year-old Nobel laureate. Suu Kyi faces 11 charges in total. She has denied all charges. Tesco warehouse workers and drivers are planning a series of strikes in a dispute over pay. More than 1,000 workers will take industrial action for several days from the 16th of December in response to the company's offer of a 4% pay rise. Trade union Unite says this offer falls well below the current retail price index inflation rate of 6%. Every household in Wales is being given a free tree to plant in a government bid to help the environment. Deputy Minister for Climate Change Lee Waters kicked off the scheme, digging a hole for his own sapling. The £2 million plan will see Welsh homes either choose a tree of their own to plant or have one planted on their behalf by the Woodland Trust. Well, those are the headlines. Now it's back to Alex and the afternoon agenda.
How, in this day and age, with the provisions of social services, the police, schools and doctors, with digital cameras and electronic record keeping, with specially trained safeguarding officers and experts, and a litany of historic abuse from which inquiries have sprang and vital lessons were supposedly learned, how can two evil, subhuman monsters get away with a campaign of the most devastating and horrific child torture for such a sustained period? How? As details of the unimaginable cruelty towards Arthur Labinjo Hughes emerged, shocking and uniting the nation in communal horror and heartbreak, the inevitable questions as to who failed in their remit, what circumstances enabled such wickedness to go unchecked, and how such a vile atrocity could yet again occur in the 21st century should remind us all that there are other Arthurs out there right now whose lives depend on us to protect them from the very people expected to do just that. It is estimated at least 62 children a year are killed by assault or abuse by those closest to them. One poor helpless baby or tot, one forgotten teen abandoned by the system, one life yet to be lived, snatched away by the perversion of a deranged monster every single week. As Arthur's face was displayed in football stadia around the country this weekend, it is critical that we all realise there will be more Arthurs this weekend, and the one after, and the one after, whose names we may never know. Little babies tortured, caged and beaten up. Confused and frightened toddlers accused of medieval curses, with at least 2,000 cases of child abuse related to faith and superstition uncovered each year. Girls being raped and assaulted by paedophiles. Boys starved and beaten. Helpless newborns left for countless hours to cry, hungry and alone, never knowing the love and nourishment of a mother. Kira Conroy, Jake and Chloe Ford, Holly Rowe, Jessica Dalgleish, Jacob Lennon, Malachi Carezi, Alfie Lamb, Mackenzie Ellis, Aria Ring, Eli Cox, Frankie Hedgecock, Asia Coody, Peter Connolly, Christy Barmu, Victoria Climby, and so many others whose tragic names adorn tiny headstones, whose little bones were broken, whose untainted innocence was destroyed, their cruelly short lives riddled with terror, neglect, and suffering. It's almost too much to bear, and far greater than you and I can ever really comprehend. There will always be evil in the world, yet the past year and a half has incarcerated hundreds, if not thousands, of helpless children exclusively with it. It has hidden them from the view of those who could intervene. It has literally locked kids up with their abusers. Some authorities have reported a rise in cases of physical and sexual abuse, and severe neglect shoot up by a breathtaking 60% in the past year alone, as the state mortgaged its tools to catch the little ones most in need of help. Lost in the system, forgotten, neglected, and hidden from view. This programme is for all of them, every single one, and the ones yet to come. For the lives of innocent children, we really need to talk about at-risk kids. Dr. Ray Jones is a social worker and a professor of social work at Kingston University. Dr. Jones, fantastic to have you on board. What on earth is going wrong in the 21st century when a case like Arthur Labinjo Hughes is making headlines?
Well, and what's going wrong at the moment is that we're less able to protect children than we were before. And children have died before. Amongst all the children that we're trying to watch out for, it's sometimes difficult to spot the ones that really are in serious difficulty in being abused in the way that poor little Arthur was. But it's got more difficult now because we have less time to do it and less time to work across the different agencies, different professions to find out what's going on. I'm really worried about it.
But why is that? Why do we seem to have less time, less resources, less care for little children who are suffering such extreme abuse?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And I've given more than 50 years of my professional life to trying to protect children and to help families care for their children well. And it's worse now than it has been certainly for the last 10, 15 years because of the big cuts that have been made in services. And I'm not just talking about social work. I'm a social worker, but I'm not just talking about social work. I'm talking about health visiting. I'm talking about policing. I'm talking about the difficulty in recruiting, retaining community paediatricians, those specialist doctors. And over the last 10 years, since 2010, so more than 10 years now, and all of those public services have been shrunk, cut back. And at the same time, more families are getting into difficulty. I know in relation to Arthur, this is not about poverty. But for some families, it is about poverty and caring for their children well. And, yep, they're getting into more difficulty and we have less time and less resource to help them.
How many Arthurs are there likely to be out there, do you think? I mean, this is a case that has shocked the country into silence, stunned most people in the UK. But I read estimates from the NSPCC that there's an estimate, and of course the records cannot be so comprehensively kept that we know this to be a final number, but they estimate about 63 children every year, and those are under 15s are being killed by those who are supposed to protect them. I mean, would you put the number higher than that?
No, it's about that number in terms of the children being killed. But of course, there's a larger number who are being injured, seriously harmed, suffering all the pain and horrors of neglect, who don't necessarily go on to die and become known in the way that Arthur has and what Arthur's life was like. So it's a larger number. If you want some numbers, There's over 400,000 children at any one time known to children's social services and social workers. Within that number, there's about 52,000 at any one time that are subject to what are called child protection plans, where there's serious concerns about the safety and welfare of those children. And those plans are created between doctors, health visitors, teachers, social workers, police officers, etc., to monitor and try and make sure that those children are okay. So that's over 50,000. In any one year, we are now initiating over 200,000 child protection investigations. If we go back to 2008, 2009, it was about 89,000 a year. It's now over 200,000 child protection investigations newly initiated each year. That's 550 each working day, including Saturdays and Sundays, and every day of the year, 365 days. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of concern, but we don't necessarily now have the time and the capacity to do the job we need to do. Find out what's happening within families, really stick with it, make sure that we pull together the information across the different people who might know that family, and think the unthinkable about what might be happening when we're not there.
Do you think that there is a peak in the number of children now at risk? And is there something going on societally, or is this simply about a system that is no longer being able to operate under the strain?
Well, I think if you greater poverty, more stress and strain for parents, increasing homelessness, then more children are going to be a cause for concern because they're not getting the care and the parenting that they need. And that has been happening since 2010. Put alongside that the help for those parents when they get into difficulty, like through Sure Start and family centres, for example, through youth services for teenagers and adolescents, those have all been cut back extremely tightly as well, so that we have less resource at a time when more families are struggling.
And what needs, I mean, we cannot possibly allow another situation like this to make headlines. It will, I am sure. But in your view, what needs to be done urgently to address what's exposed gaping holes in our system that is actually costing little babies' lives?
Well, we know how to protect children well.
I think we may have just lost Professor Ray Jones there. Well, joining us now is CEO of Inequi Safeguarding Group, Jim Gamble. He's also the Independent Child Safeguarding Commissioner for the City of London and Hackney. Jim, fantastic to have you on board. I mean, how much did this case shock you, or is it a situation where you hear of these things so often that it just happens to be one story that's broken through into mainstream media that has once again made us all scramble to say we've got problems with our system?
Well, as a father and grandfather, this case upsets me. But am I shocked? No. I mean, you've mentioned a number of children's names. We can go back to Dennis O'Neill in 1945, Jasmine Beckford. The list goes on. And whilst lots of people remember baby Peter Connolly, they remember those points when it explodes in front of the public. But what Ray has said is absolutely right. There are about 63 deaths in any given year. In the last year, there have been 13 children killed by what we call phallicide. That's when a parent kills a son or a daughter. There have been another 22 linked to maltreatment by parents, and another 20 by other forms of abuse. So this is a real problem. But you've got to put it in the context, as Ray did very effectively there, with the huge numbers where, under extreme pressure, social workers, police officers, health professionals, and others are getting it right. In this case, when it goes wrong, everybody points the finger at them. And government, more than anyone else, is really good at pointing the finger at other people, but they're not so good at looking in the mirror and reflecting on what they've got wrong. And I think if you look at the last 10 years, what we have seen is asset stripping of the frontline services in this particular area. Fewer police stretched over bigger areas. Children and adolescent mental health services so grossly under-resourced that it's adding to the epidemic of people with complex needs and issues. Adult and mental health services, another area of crisis. Social work is in the front line, education's in the front line, and they're under massive pressure. So I'm not making excuses or saying people shouldn't be accountable, but what I am saying is if you are going to point the finger and carry out a review, then you're not going to tell us anything new. If you really want to learn, if Boris Johnson and his cabinet want to learn, They should look at the last 10 years and they need to right the wrongs of the asset stripping that's gone on and give those frontline professionals the resources back that they need to protect our most young and vulnerable.
But I don't understand how we've got into a situation where we're having yet another inquiry. There was an inquiry after Baby P, another case that shocked the nation. Why are people not listening? Why are these resources not being put in place? You must do a lot of lobbying yourself to say that the system's under strain and there are actually lives being lost as a result.
Well, I'm fundamentally independent, so from my point of view, I speak for and advocate on behalf of the children with no voice. So I consistently call out government. Everyone doesn't do that, and some people simply aren't in a position to because they're working within a framework that government provides. But at the end of the day, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to work this out. And the government from the coalition, have begun peeling back services. I mean, knife crime is at an all-time high. There's an epidemic around mental health, health and well-being and critical issues that set the context of a child's life. I heard earlier on the programme them talking about county lines. There's the digital tsunami, which actually reaches people in places it wouldn't have reached before. It allows coercive control to take place and over young people who are then blackmailed once they've been seduced or groomed into a situation to do things they never would. So we've got this toxic environment that is actually accelerating harm for our children and young people. So rather than stripping back resources, because what we do when we do reviews and we carry out reviews is we try and rearrange the deck chairs to make it look like we're doing something. So to tell the public, yes, this is never going to happen again. We're going to look at it. It will happen again. No matter what we do and no matter how good we get at it, this will happen again because manipulative and malign, malevolent parents behind the four walls of their house will do what they want, and they will long-arm social services, they will long-arm the police. And if you even look at the interview of the stepmom when police turned up after the child had been fatally wounded, after Arthur had been brutally assaulted, she was still minimizing, self-justifying and blaming everyone else. He was on the listening step. He threw himself off. He bashed his head 5 times. When you're dealing with that type of person, then you've got a real problem, because you're not getting direct line of sight. You're having to deal with someone who's extremely practiced in lying. Predators that I've met and seen throughout my career, whether they're pedophiles, child abusers in the home or elsewhere, they are brilliant liars, and they lie best of all and first of all to themselves. That's how they're able to get away with these things for as long as they do.
With cases like this, you think there must be neighbours, relatives, friends, teachers, someone somewhere who must have thought, well, it's funny how often that little boy's injured, or I haven't seen that little boy for a while. As members of the public, if we did have suspicions about the life circumstances and safety of a child that we know, what can we do to act on it?
Well, you need to phone your local children's social care. You need to engage with the police or anyone that you can, and you need to be absolutely consistent in your persistence. If something tells you that something's wrong, if you've got a gut feeling where you think that child is at risk, phoning once might not be good enough, because the police might be fooled when they turn up at the door and mom or dad says, no, have a look, at little Arthur, he's fine. What you've got to do is you've got to be consistent and persistent, because the nature of this type of work means that it's going to happen and it's going to keep on happening. It's likely to escalate. So people very often in the houses next door will have their suspicions, and a lot of the time those suspicions won't come into the public glare until after something has happened. In this case, we need to know what actually happened, because the school did contact the stepmom and the family and say, look, we're worried that Arthur's not at school. And ultimately, they were told, well, no, he's fine. He's in the back garden, he's playing, worried about COVID, lockdown acts as a screen. And of course, how far do you push that? The thing that I would say is, when you're in doubt, get up, knock the door, cross the threshold. If you turn up unannounced to say, just call in to check, to see how he is, and you are long-armed from the door and your sense of concern is then heightened, then you've got more evidence to go and say, look, I've tried to see the child and I've been pushed back. But you've got to be persistent. And I'm not saying that family members weren't in this case. That needs to be looked at. But if you're a member of the public and you've got a concern about a child, remember that things can go wrong. Don't assume somebody else is dealing with it.
Jim, thank you so much, and thanks for that advice. We're going to cross now to the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, who is addressing this particular issue right now in Parliament.
So can I go now, do you think?
We're just going to get that connection for you now. In the meantime, you can also email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, on this very sensitive story. And you can also comment on Twitter. And, of course, we have a poll up right now asking whether or not...
that I am as determined as everybody in this House to get to the truth and expose what went wrong and take any action necessary to protect children. To do so, serious questions need to be asked. I want to make clear that police officers, teachers, social workers, health workers and others go to work each day to try to make things better, to do their best at what are very difficult jobs. Those already serving our country's most vulnerable children deserve our thanks, and I want to be extremely clear that no safeguarding professional should be the victim of any abuse. The targeting of individuals is wrong and helps nobody. But that does not mean we should not seek to understand what went wrong and how we can stop it from happening again. The public deserve to know why, in this rare case, things went horrifyingly wrong and what more could be done to prevent abuse such as this happening again in the future. Since the horrendous deaths of Peter Connolly, Daniel Pelker and sadly others, the government has established stronger multi-agency working, putting a shared and equal duty on police, councils and health in local areas to work together to safeguard and promote the welfare of children alongside a role for schools. I'm sure members across the House will recognise that improvements have been made from previous reviews, but the question now is whether that is enough. In order to look at issues nationally as well as locally, we established the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel in 2017 for cases like Arthur's. That is why, given the enormity of this case, the range of agencies involved and the potential for its implications to be felt nationally, over the weekend, Mr. Speaker, I asked Annie Hudson, Chair of the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, to work with leaders in Solihull to deliver a single national independent review of Arthur's death to identify what must be learnt from this terrible case. This will encompass local government as well as those working in the police, health and education sectors. Officials in my department are already in close contact with the Solihull Safeguarding Partnership, which is grateful for the support offered and agree with this approach as the best way to deliver comprehensive national learning and identify whether there are any gaps that need to be addressed. Annie and her colleagues on the national panel, who come from the police, health and children's services, have dedicated their lives and decades-long careers to bettering the lives of the most vulnerable children in our society. And I have every faith that their review will be robust, it will be vigorous and thorough. I've already assured Annie, as I assure you, Mr. Speaker, now, that she will be given all the support she needs to do the job properly. This review will focus specifically on Arthur's case and identify where improvements need to be made. But I also want to make certain we have looked at how all the relevant local agencies are working now, including how they are working together. For that reason, I have also asked Ofsted, the Care Quality Commission, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, and Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation to lead a joint targeted area inspection. I have asked that each of these inspectorates be involved because of the range of local services which had been involved in Arthur and his family's life during the preceding months. These joint inspections are well established, but a new ambitious approach will be used with a sharp focus on the entry point to the child protection system across all agencies. This will mean we can truly look at where improvements are needed by all the agencies tasked with protecting children in the Solihull area, so that we can be assured that we are doing everything in our power to protect other children and prevent such evil crimes. As part of this inspection, all the agencies tasked with protecting children at risk of abuse and neglect in Solihull will have their effectiveness considered and instructed on where improvements must be made, both in Solihull as well as where learnings can be applied to other areas around the country. These inspectorates have met today to plan this work, and the work will begin next week. I, as well as officials in my department and across government, could not be taking this more seriously, and I've been working this weekend to bring everyone together to make sure this work can start immediately. Over the coming days, we will publish terms of reference and timelines for this national review and the local inspection. Ahead of that, more widely, we are already investing heavily to help the legions of dedicated professionals on the front line deliver the care that we all know every child deserves. Since the spending review in 2019, there have been year-on-year real terms increases for local government, as well as the unprecedented additional £6 billion funding provided directly to councils to support them with the immediate and long-term impact of COVID spending pressures, including children's social care. Yet, we've also known that the care system needed bold and wide-ranging reforms, which is why we have the independent review of children's social care happening now. I know that Josh McAllister, who leads the review, Mr. Speaker, will make recommendations about what a decisive child protection response needs to look like, given it sits at the core of the system he is reviewing. And importantly, I know that the review will be looking at how social workers, especially those with the most experience, can spend time with families and protecting children, because we all know social workers do their best work with families, not behind a desk. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to the review's recommendations in due course, because in any complex system, it is important, it is imperative in my view, to investigate thoroughly, to learn and improve the system. My mantra continues to be that sunlight is the best possible disinfectant, because if we are to improve services where they need improving, we must share data and evidence. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the prosecuting barrister, Jonas Hanken QC, his team and the jury for their service in this troubling case. As the court heard, Arthur's tragic death is a result of the cruelty of his father and his father's partner. No government anywhere in the world can legislate for evil, but we will take action wherever we can to stop it from happening again, because we must do more. And to do more, I'd like to end my statement with a plea to everyone in our country. Anyone who sees or suspects child abuse can report their concerns to local children's services, or by contacting the government-supported NSPCC helpline for adults or practitioners concerned about a child or young person. So if you see or suspect child abuse, report it. If you are worried about a child you know, report it. If something appears off or you are seeing something that troubles you, report it. As we uncover what went wrong, Mr. Speaker, and what led to Arthur's tragic death, we must also strengthen our resolve to make sure that we prevent these crimes as much as they can be possibly prevented. We must make sure that those who would do wicked acts to children face justice. We must do absolutely everything in our power to protect vulnerable young children from harrowing and evil abuse. And I commend the statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement to the House today. Mr. Speaker, this has been a truly horrendous case. My heart goes out to everyone who knew and loved Arthur, and to all of those involved in investigating and bringing to justice the depraved and wicked individuals responsible for his death. And I join with the Secretary of State in paying tribute to frontline workers right across children's social care who work so hard to support families day in, day out. I welcome the announcement by the Attorney General's Office that the sentences handed down on Friday will be reviewed under the unduly lenient sentences scheme. And I welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman's clear determination to get to the bottom of what has happened and his action in ordering a national review and a joint targeted area inspection. It is right to put in place inquiries as soon as possible, not merely into how individual agencies acted, but how they acted together. And it's vital that whatever lessons can be learned from what was happened and what didn't happen in Solihull are acted on as soon as possible. Searching questions must be asked about the way in which services operated locally, but questions must also be asked nationally. Questions about how the services that should be keeping children safe are overseen and why, tragically, cases like this keep happening. Now, I know the Secretary of State takes these issues just as seriously as I do, and I very much hope that he will be reviewing urgently the way in which services are inspected, are challenged and are improved. And I ask the Secretary of State, who I know hasn't been in his post for too long, to ensure that his own department gets its house in order. In 2016, the department committed to a target that by 2020, all vulnerable children, no matter where they live, receive the same high quality of care and support, and the best outcome for every child is at the heart of every decision made. The then Permanent Secretary told the Public Accounts Committee that this target was delayed to 2022 because the department did not have a detailed plan in place to deliver that target. The Public Accounts Committee found that the department had made only limited progress in improving the quality of children's social care services. And in 2019, the Permanent Secretary accepted that having nearly 60% of local authorities rated lower than good by Ofsted for children's social care was terrible. Indeed, he told the Public Accounts Committee, "I am not able to sit in front of you and say that there will be no councils failing their Ofsted inspections in 2022. Clearly there will be. Some schools fail, some hospitals fail, and some councils fail." Mr. Speaker, failure should never be an acceptable outcome for any public service, and that is especially true when it comes to protecting children. For too long, this government has tolerated failing children's services and a failure to protect children. Vulnerable children are being failed, and that cannot go on. The Secretary of State must now set out how he plans to tackle that culture, that failing services are acceptable in our country, acceptable for our children, in his own department, just as much as in Solihull. That is the challenge he faces, and that is the standard by which he will be judged. One final point, Mr. Speaker. We have heard a lot in recent days about the unimaginable suffering this little boy endured at the hands of two evil individuals who brought an end to his short life. But I hope that we can remember also how in better days Arthur lived his short life. I hope that while we do not hesitate to learn from these tragic events, we also, as far as we can, remember Arthur for who he was, not for what others did to him or for how he was let down. I hope that when we hear his name, we think first of a gentle, caring, happy child, the little boy who was remembered so movingly by so many across our country this weekend, the little boy with the beaming smile who should still be here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So, I'm grateful for the Honourable Lady's words and especially her final few sentences in the way we should remember Arthur and remember that there are family members who are grieving for Arthur today. I think she makes a powerful point about making sure we continue on the path to improvements. I spent a good amount of time as the Children and Families Minister in the Department of Education, and I think the team have really focused on those improvements in children's social care. She spoke about a long way to go, and I think I would recognise that there are challenges, but I think it's also worth praising the team, both in the department but also in local government up and down the country, where we, not a long time ago, only had about 37% of local authorities having a good Ofsted inspection. I think the one thing I would correct her on, I don't think it's so binary as pass and fail, because actually it's very much about areas of improvement in children's social care. But that 37 now has risen to 50% of local authorities that have got a good inspection. And of course we have to continue on that path and keep going further. But I'm very pleased to hear supporting the course of action we've taken today.
Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi there giving a statement to the Commons on the inquiry into child safeguarding and social services following the tragic death of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Now, why are men sending unsolicited pictures of their private parts to little girls? Yeah, a new report warns of the dangerous normalisation of online abuse. We'll be covering that after the break, but first, it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Young girls are facing a barrage of unwanted sexual images sent by men they don't know, and it's becoming dangerously normalised. A study found that the majority of little girls between 12 and 18, the majority, had received an unwanted image of male genitalia. How utterly vile. Over half of the girls did nothing about it, with under a fifth of cases reported to social media companies. Only a quarter felt that they could tell a friend, and only 2% reported it to their school. Now imagine, instead of sickos on social media, hundreds of thousands of perverts lurking by school gates, waiting to expose themselves. How utterly disgusting has our society become? Meanwhile, child safety groups have threatened legal action against the UK data watchdog if it fails to introduce age verification checks for pornography online. Sophisticated technology has existed for years, yet weak excuses and sickening defences of adult sexual freedoms have prevailed over the well-being of women and children. It has to stop. The Children's Charities Coalition on Internet Safety, representing 11 children's charities, said it would bring a High Court challenge if it did not take action as the government prepares to introduce its online safety bill, with fears already amassing that it will significantly water down regulations that would protect children from online pornography under the banner, of course, of libertarianism. It's an issue that we here at the Afternoon Agenda will not leave alone until the day that our country is no longer a haven for paedophiles and a world in which the innocence of children is sacrificed at the altar of perverse adult liberty, while the government, all the while able to act, simply looks the other way. Well, Kelly J. Keane is a women's rights campaigner and the founder of Standing for Women. Kelly J., does this surprise you at all these statistics that the majority of 12 to 18-year-old girls have had unsolicited pictures of male genitals?
Gosh, absolutely not. I'm surprised it's not every single last one, to be honest. What the fear is for me is that there's no will to do it. Otherwise, we definitely would have prevented it. I got a 30-day ban from Facebook today for posting a death threat to me, where somebody said that I deserve to be shot. And I'm banned from Facebook. So there must be some sort of algorithm around that can ban me. So can Facebook not recognise a penis?
Well, this is the difficulty, isn't it? Because people are saying, well, it's the responsibility of the social media giants. Otherwise, is it not the responsibility of government? We have now the online safety bill, as it's being called, as it's being conveniently renamed, which is being currently worked on. And without doubt, there'll be lots of lobbyists from organisations saying to the government, pornography, especially when watched by children, is so harmful to society. And yet, we've had this situation for the past 10, 15, 20 years. Why is it today, now, when it's so clear that the sexualisation of society is leading to things such as rape culture in schools, why is it that we live in a society where most people seem to not think that's a problem?
It can only be explained by the fact that they genuinely don't care. I think porn clearly is a massive issue for adults as well as children. But when it comes to social media in general, I mean, is there any good part of social media for a young, impressionable mind under the age of 18? And I really have yet to hear an argument where it says it improves the life of any child. I think it's slowly destroying our entire society. As for adult men, I think there ought to be some really harsh penalties and some prosecutions against men that send those images. I think there should be layers of penalties for sending a child an unsolicited picture of a penis. I mean, it says unwanted. I wonder if there's ever a wanted picture that anyone receives of a penis. I can't think there is, but it's deadly serious, and it's sexual abuse.
I was having a conversation with my producer earlier who was talking to me about every time she gets on a bus, she seems to have some sort of image waiting to be airdropped to her phone. I don't understand what's going on with society and why on earth women like you, like me, like my producer, are standing up saying this is fundamentally wrong and there is zero leadership. How on earth can we break through and start getting society really talking about this issue?
I think there's a number of things we can do. I think as parents, we have a duty to talk very frankly and openly with our children. We have a duty to talk to our schools to find out what they're teaching. I know that schools do talk about pornography, but often it's how to control your habit rather than it may cause erectile dysfunction, and it may actually totally change your brain chemistry and responses to an adult sexual relationship when you get older. I think there are some massive social media giants like Joe Rogan who are beginning to talk to young men about the dangers of porn. I think that would be a good thing. But you have to ask yourself, what is on the hard drives of people in power if they are not taking this seriously, if they're not equally as repulsed by you and I and disgusted by kids having access and being abused through the online space. If they're not really disgusted, you have to ask yourself, what are their own personal habits when it comes to this sort of online activity?
Yeah, you make a really great point there, Kelly J. Thank you so much for coming on this show again. We're going to keep pushing very hard on the afternoon agenda and shouting about this until we see real change. So I'm sure we'll be continuing this conversation, sadly, in the future, because I don't have high expectations for the government pulling their finger out. Kelly J. Keane, who's the founder of Standing for Women. Joe Biden says he'll make it very, very difficult for Russia to launch an attack on Ukraine amidst concerns an invasion could take place within weeks. How the US, NATO and the West respond to Russia's demands and their large military threat will have far-reaching consequences for the whole of European security. Kiev says there are already 90,000 Russian troops near the Ukraine border, and President Vladimir Putin is now carefully waiting for the US and the West to make their move, with Biden and Putin set to speak directly to each other by video call tomorrow. So how close is Europe to war? Joining us now is Keir Giles, an expert in Russian power projection at Chatham House. Keir, is this just power projection, or is this Putin lining up his chess pieces ready to make a move?
Well, it could be both. Now, let's not forget that the options are open for Putin, and what happens next really depends on how the West responds to the demands he's making, the ultimatums he's setting, and lining up those troops, which most assessments now seem to think would actually be ready to mount some kind of attack on Ukraine. So what Biden says to him tomorrow and how the West reacts more broadly is, as you said, absolutely crucial for deciding not only how this crisis works, but also what Russia does in the future, because this is a make or break moment. It's the time to decide whether it is actually all right for Russia to decide that it has the right to determine what other countries do, to say that there are limits on their own foreign and security policy, on their independence and on their futures. If we think that that is not acceptable, then a stand has to be made and a stop sign has to be put up, and this is an opportunity to do exactly that.
I think the problem is here that the West almost allowed Russia to take Crimea with impunity. There wasn't really any boots on the ground. There was, sort of at best tutting from the international community that's emboldened Putin to essentially be able to threaten wherever he wants within what he considers to be the sphere of Russia's influence.
Well, there were a lot of good reasons why it wasn't possible to react in the way that you see Biden reacting now to Crimea back at the time. But we've also got to remember that that's just one of many examples where Russia has got away with some form of aggressive action to get what it wants. Now, the sad fact is that, unfortunately, Russia just doesn't have that many ways of being relevant to the rest of the world, except by throwing its weight around in this aggressive manner. And so every time they want to have a conversation with the United States or to get some other form of recognition or respect in that very peculiar Russian sense, the best way to do it is to cause some kind of crisis, because they found that every single time it works. Now, on this occasion, their demands for what they want for effectively not invading Ukraine are getting bigger and broader all the time. It started off with Ukraine adhering to Russia's interpretation of the peace agreement that supposedly is putting a ceasefire in place in that war in the east. And now it's expanding to NATO, not taking on any more members in the eastern part of Europe. And who knows where those demands are going to stop if they are met on this occasion, because there's no reason to think that when you satisfy one demand from Russia, then more are not going to come.
I mean, in terms of Russia's actual ability to invade a country and then withstand foreign direct military intervention, how tooled up and equipped is it to do that? If there was a circumstance where it goes into Ukraine and America did put boots on the ground?
Well, there are two things there that might not happen. First of all, it's not necessarily the case that Russia actually wants to invade Ukraine and hold territory. There are plenty of other ways in which they can do damage to Ukraine to try to force it to its will and to try to make the West as a whole reach terms. A part of Russia's doctrine and strategy is destroying civilian infrastructure, critical infrastructure that makes the country run through missile strikes, for example, which wouldn't need the military to go in at all. But then the prospect of other countries sending troops to support Ukraine on the front line is even more remote. Let's not forget, Ukraine isn't a NATO ally. It is just the front line of where NATO needs to resist Russian incursions.
Keir Giles from Chatham House, thank you so much for your wisdom and knowledge on this topic as it continues to unfold. I'm sure we'll be catching up again very soon. Women seeking help from GPs with diabetes or depression will be prescribed non-judgmental fitness classes. This Girl Can, which has already enjoyed success within football, has been designed by Sport England and will run a range of classes from early next year, including dancing, boxing and yoga. It's estimated 1/5 of patients visit their GP over primarily social problems, and it's hoped the classes will help to address low physical activity levels in women. Well, Dr. Veena Babu is a London GP and founder of IV Dance, the UK's leading Bollywood YouTube channel, running popular workshops and boot camps. Fantastic to have you on the show. Now, is prescribing exercise classes really the trick when it comes to women with poor levels of health?
I think, firstly, thank you for having me. I think this is really exciting because with COVID, with the pandemic, with people not having as much access to, say, community, to other people, to actually going out and having the energy or motivation to exercise or being anxious, providing something that we can prescribe will just give them the boost that they need. And often, psychological stresses can manifest in physical symptoms. So this could be, like you mentioned, depression. It can lead to obesity and increased fat levels that can then lead to diabetes. All of this can help tackle that.
Is the problem here not that for those people who are probably most in need of this, those people who are most overweight and at risk of having things like metabolic syndrome and obesity-related illnesses, that it's very difficult to encourage them to participate in sport? You might have someone in that middle category thinking, I wouldn't mind shedding a few pounds, who would be happily prescribed exercise. But for those who probably need this the most, well, it's just not going to get through to them.
So I agree with what you're saying, but I also think it's a sense of community, right? So say you had a friend who got prescribed these classes and tells another friend, so you have company to go to, you can company to go with, and once you get that sense of community, a lot of these classes, it encourages you, it motivates you, you're doing a bit more than you did the day before, and it's all about taking those little steps in improving your holistic health that will help us battle these chronic conditions, as per se, because it's not going to be an overnight thing, and we all have to work together. We already have social prescribers among a lot of GPs all over the UK, actually, and they help prescribe patients to music classes, dance classes, but all of this was, with COVID on the back burner. So the fact that these classes are being launched is really, really exciting.
There'll be people, nutritionists out there, who say, frankly, you can't outrun a bad diet. And if these classes are going to be, say, once a week in someone's schedule, there's a risk here that they might go to one or two, think, well, it's OK, I don't mind it, but I'm too busy, I'm not seeing any changes, and just give up.
You're absolutely right. It can't be in isolation. It has to be in conjunction with a healthy diet. And often it's about lifestyle change, right? And change is something that everybody kind of stays away from. No one wants to change eating what they love or doing what they love. So I think, again, going back to the baby steps of maybe cut down the sugars, maybe cut down the fizzy drinks. Or what I love telling my patients is 1 day a week, eat whatever you want. But if for 6 days you can abide by healthy, nutritious, wholesome meals, I think we're going to get one step closer to getting to our goal.
And what strikes me here is this is, again, for women only, when it's quite clear, when you look at statistics throughout the pandemic, when it's related to obesity and obesity-related illness, that men are probably in a worse-off situation and in worse shape on the whole than women. Why do you think it's important that this programme is directed solely towards women?
That's a really interesting question. I think often, from what I have read recently and seen patients tell me, women go to gyms or they try to go to gyms and classes where they're mixed classes, and some of them who might be quite overweight may not always feel comfortable with men in a similar setting or may have had, negative experiences. So when there are classes only catering to women, it might give them that freedom of, okay, I'm not going to be judged or looked at in a certain way. I can just go and enjoy the next hour, worrying about my fitness or, just letting go of the day's stress. So I think that has a big part to play in it. And often if, say, a woman of a household is going and getting active, she might then impact the rest of the members as well. So I think it's also the domino effect. You have to think of the community, as we were talking earlier.
Dr. Veena Babu, thank you so much. I wouldn't mind being prescribed some Bollywood dancing. Thanks, Mum.
Anytime.
Thank you so much. Now, lots more to come after a short break. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
I'm Alex Phillips. Now, this show isn't news as you know it, it's discussion and debate on things that really need to be on your agenda. Still to come this hour. The Education Secretary says a national review into the death of Arthur Labinjo Hughes will look at how all agencies involved in safeguarding communicate with one another. A legal challenge has been issued against the Scottish Government for allowing people to choose their own gender on the census. And with all of those concerns about the safeguarding of children raised by the Arthur Labinjo Hughes case, we really need to talk about at-risk kids. Are the authorities failing vulnerable children? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Tamsin.
Thanks very much, Alex. Here's your news at 5 o'clock. The Education Secretary has announced a major investigation into the circumstances surrounding the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Nadeem Sahawi told MPs all agencies who care for vulnerable children in Solihull will be reviewed, and that while the government can't legislate against evil, more must be done to stop it from ever happening again.
The whole nation is distraught at Arthur's tragic and horrific death. We across this House and across this country find it impossible to imagine how any adult could commit such evil acts against a child. I am as determined as everybody in this House to get to the truth and expose what went wrong and take any action necessary to protect children.
2 former police officers have been jailed for 2 years and 9 months after sharing photos of murder victims. PC Dennis Jaffa and PC Jamie Lewis took photos of Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry, whose bodies were found in northwest London, and then shared them on WhatsApp. The judge described their conduct as appalling and inexplicable. The victims' family said they're a disgrace to the force and to mankind.
I would say they are more sorry that they got caught than they are about what they did. You know, they've got caught with their hands in the cookie jar and now they're sorry.
The Prime Minister is pledging £300 million of funding to crack down on county lines drugs gangs in England and Wales. The investment will help treat and rehabilitate addicts. Boris Johnson says recreational users will also be targeted and face having their passports and driving licences confiscated. Under the plans, police will have powers to seize drug dealers' phones and text warnings to their customers.
Those people who are casually, without thought, taking drugs and not connecting their drug usage with the violence and degradation we see in the supply chain to get their cocaine or whatever it is to them. We need to connect them to that, and there needs to be some consequence that makes them change their behaviour.
Todon Primary School in Scotland has been forced to close for a week following a suspected outbreak of the Omicron variant. It comes after one of the AstraZeneca vaccine creators, Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, warned future pandemics could be more contagious and more lethal. She's also urging caution over the new COVID variant, which could be more resistant to both current vaccines and natural antibodies.
Truth is, the next one could be worse. It could be more contagious or more lethal, or both. We cannot allow a situation where we have gone through all we have gone through and then find that the enormous economic losses we have sustained mean that there is still no funding for pandemic preparedness.
Thousands of people still without power 10 days after Storm Arwen hit are now bracing themselves for more bad weather. The Met Office has warned Storm Barra will hit the UK tomorrow. Yellow wind warnings are in place across England and Wales. Yellow warnings for snow have been issued for southern and western Scotland.
99.8% of those affected by the storm have had their power supply restored so far. But, Mr. Speaker, this is not good enough. It is completely unacceptable that around 1,600 were still in this position as of this morning, but the situation is improving each hour.
Mr. Speaker, and the Secretary of State can make it to the North East for a photo opportunity, but he won't come here to answer our questions. If there were thousands of homes without power in the South East, he would be here. So last month, the government showed its contempt for the North East by a failure to invest in our transport infrastructure, and now we see the consequences of the failure to invest in and support our energy infrastructure.
Former Premier League footballer Joey Barton has been cleared of assaulting a rival manager. He was accused of pushing over the former Barnsley boss, Daniel Stendhal, in a tunnel 2 years ago, leaving him bloodied and with a broken tooth. The jury at Sheffield Crown Court took under 2 hours to find Barton not guilty. Tesco warehouse workers and drivers are planning a series of strikes in the lead up to Christmas. More than 1,000 people will take industrial action from the 16th of December in response to the company's offer of a 4% pay rise. Trade union Unite says it falls well below the current retail price index inflation rate of 6%. Well, that's all for now. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour. Until then, it's back to Alex and the afternoon agenda.
can even comprehend being able to harm a child? Who could raise their hand to a small innocent baby? Who could break its ribs, sexually abuse that child, torture it, make it cry and bleed and reach for its mummy, reach for anything, for anyone, for comfort, for protection, for love they have never experienced? How does a human become such a beast, capable of such wickedly unthinkable, heinous acts? That is a question for psychiatrists. But for the rest of us, if it takes a village to raise a child, where were we? How does society as a whole come together to wrap itself around the vulnerable and the innocent? Whether it's our profession or not, whether we're a relative or friend, a teacher, a doctor, a neighbour, how can we, as a community, form a protective shield around those poor mites in every town and city in this country facing abuse at the hands of those supposed to protect them? Anyone with even a shred of soul would have been horrified as the details of the torture of Arthur Labinjo Hughes came to light. Would have felt the rage and the horror course through their veins at these two disgusting monsters. Would have quietly found their stomach knot, their eyes well up, their hands jump to their mouths in horrified reflex at the videos of torture, the perverse messages egging the other on to commit crueler and crueler acts of abuse, until finally, the little frame of that poor boy's body could simply stand no more. One child a week is estimated to be killed through abuse or neglect here in the UK. Let that statistic sink in. There are thousands of little ones suffering right now in a manner few of us can even comprehend. Somebody knows these families. Someone somewhere has suspicions. For some of you, it's your job to care and to make others aware. For others, it is surely our social responsibility to help to protect those who simply cannot protect themselves. Today, we desperately need to talk about at-risk kids. Well, let's return briefly to Jim Gamble, who's the Chief Executive of the Unique Safeguarding Group. Jim, you just heard Nadeem Zahawi there talk to Parliament following the death of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Are you convinced that the new Education Secretary has got his finger on the pulse and can make a difference?
Well, I actually admire the new Education Secretary. I met him when I was part of the team in Bromley Borough that helped them go from inadequate to good with outstanding leadership in 2 years, and he attended and we had a very positive conversation. What I have to say in this case, however, is I'm not convinced this will make any difference. The national panel engaging with the local safeguarding partnership, I don't think there's anything new or anything radical that will be found from that. And I think if those people, and I know many of them who sit in those roles, I think if they're honest, they'll say that they already know what the issues are. I think the joint targeted area inspection that he talks about is singularly focused on the multi-agency partnership in Solihull. So therefore, apart from the care review, which has now been running for a period of time, there's nothing looking at this strategically. And my concern is, and what I'd hoped to hear, was that the Education Secretary was going to say that government was going to take a long, hard look at itself. That doesn't seem to be the case. And in an environment where funding for children's social care began to decrease in 2010, where we have had over 1,000 Sure Start centres close between then and 2019, when we've seen an 84% rise in child protection plans by 2019, the situation is getting worse. When we've seen teen suicide rates increase by 67% between 2010 and 2018, we now have the added issues around COVID on this. I really think if they were going to look at making a difference, they know what the fundamental problems at the front line are. They're linked to the lack of strategic grip and leadership. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Pointing the finger at others is great, but look in the mirror yourself. You need to look at the absence of leadership, the absence of drive and determination at a government level to fix those things that have gone wrong during a period of austerity when we've allowed money to go to other places, where perhaps we'd have been much better pushing that money into local authorities, because they're left carrying the can and they're in a very difficult situation. So I'm disappointed. I'll wait to see what comes from it, but I think we could probably predict the outcome of that review. And what do reviews do? They create a space so that we can deal with the horror of this, the horror that we all feel. We're all terrified that it could happen to another child. But the passage of time will mean that we'll go back to our day-to-day lives that are very busy, doing many things that benefit the public, but ultimately little, if anything, will change. And that's not good enough.
It's not good enough, Jim. Thank you so much for coming on. Let's stay in touch over this. We'll keep a focus on it at the afternoon agenda. We can guarantee you that, at least. Well, joining me now is Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spiked. Brendan, you've described Arthur Labinjo Hughes' murder as a stain on the nation. Let's look at the broader picture in this. What do you think societally is going wrong when something as horrific as this crime can take place in the 21st century?
I think that's what we need to ask ourselves. What went so horribly wrong in this situation? Because, we know that there were two monsters living in that house who treated this child abominably in such an appalling way. But it also looks like he was let down by society more broadly. And I think one of the reasons is that society was shut down at the moment he was being tortured. This was when we were in lockdown, so schools weren't open in the normal way. We know that, for example, one of his uncles told the police about the abuse and said he wanted to go and visit Arthur, and the police threatened that man with arrest if he broke COVID restrictions. So there are lots of questions to ask about the consequences of closing down society for the most vulnerable members of society, and that's something we've got to wrap our heads around as well.
I mean, there is the old adage, isn't there, that it takes a village to bring up a child. Do you think in the 21st century we've lost that sense of community? We've lost the willingness to what might be regarded as interfering in other people's lives, to speaking to our neighbours, to reporting things that we think are not correct, and supporting those people who might be struggling with parenting?
Well, I think the thing is that, most parents are good parents, right? Most parents love their children and bring them up very well. That's most people's experience. But there are some people who don't. And normally what happens is that neighbours notice something or the extended family notice something and they try to draw the attention of the authorities to the problem at hand. That is what happened in this case. So Arthur's grandmother, for example, who's obviously very distressed at the moment, she sent photographs to social workers. She tries to raise the alarm about his abuse. But sadly, it wasn't really clocked by the social workers who visited. They agreed with the stepmother and the father that it was a happy household. So there seems to have been some serious mistakes made there. I think what children need is firstly a loving family. That's the most important thing. But they also need a broader network, the extended family, schools, community, those informal networks that are often better at spotting problems than officialdom itself is. And the problem in this situation is either that people did spot the problem, but they weren't listened to in the right way, or the avenues for people to go and rescue Arthur were closed down because of the unique lockdown restrictions and the lockdown situation. So it was a coming together of a horrible situation. The lesson, I think, is that we do need strong networks, strong family bonds in order to keep everyone safe and happy.
I've been astonished by some of the statistics I've been told today. So, for instance, it's estimated by the NSPCC around 63 children lose their lives, are killed every year in situations similar to little Arthur, which is more than one a week. There's 400,000 children at one time on the list of social services, 52,000 on the serious concerns list. Now, those with imminent threats to their health and their lives, and 200,000 child protection investigations every year. Is there something else going wrong, more broadly speaking? Are we now living in a world, do you think, an increasingly adult world with fast declining moral values? And that's something we need to also urgently address.
That could be true. I think there could be a breakdown in the old bonds and the old networks that used to keep communities more closely bonded than might be the case at the moment. I think one problem might be with officialdom as well, because one concern I have, and I don't really have any proof for this, but it's a bit of an instinct, I worry that social workers now keep an eye on so many families that they miss the cases of extreme abuse and extreme neglect. So there is the possibility that suspicion of parents, especially suspicion of parents that comes from local social workers or from the state more broadly, that could be causing problems in itself, because it means that so many families are being watched. Sometimes they will just be families that are not very good, haven't really got their act together very well. So many of them are being watched and monitored now that perhaps we're missing the cases of extreme neglect like Arthur and Baby P and Daniel Pelker and Victoria Climbié, recent cases over the past few years where the most extraordinary, barbaric things were done to young children. And in all of those instances, opportunities were missed by the authorities to spot that abuse and do something about it. So I think we have to have a serious discussion about how social work works, how the authorities monitor these situations, and how we can ensure that every child in this country is safe in their home.
Yeah, Brendan, it's a massively urgent and pressing issue. No child should be abused, let alone killed. Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this really sensitive subject today. Well, with me now is Conservative London Assembly member and the chair of the Police and Crime Committee, Sean Bailey. Sean, fantastic to have you in the studio for once. Normally we're talking down the line. This is a shocking case, but it is the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? Especially when you look at things that might be going on in cities such as London. We've got children who are essentially being abused or tortured with sort of strange medieval concepts of witchcraft and superstitious beliefs and related to faith. We've got other young kids being groomed and dragged into drugs-related gangs with county lines. What is going on?
I think there's two things to say. This kind of abuse has always happened to children. I think the difference now is the scale. But in a sense, there's two icebergs here. There's the iceberg that is attack, people attacking their children, but the much larger iceberg, which is neglect. So we're all focused on attack. We have horrific cases that drive the public perception of these things. But actually, there's a vast number of children who are just neglected, and they make their way through. School picks up some things here, maybe youth work there, but they're just neglected, and that rolls on and has a real impact on their life and then what they do as adults. And then we have the other piece that we always look at, which is where the law, the authorities as we see them, have failed, and we focused on those cases, rightly so, but I think there's a bigger piece around what are we doing about children who are being neglected.
Is there something socially as well that we desperately need to address and talk about? Is there perhaps something that's gone on lately? And without wanting to point the finger of blame at people, perhaps there are people, frankly, becoming parents who should not be becoming parents. And perhaps they're thinking, well, you know, if I do this, then it's a system whereby I'll receive child support, I might get a house, or there's broken homes with, you know, various different secondary parents, step parents coming in and out of children's lives. And this, frankly, creates a toxic cocktail in some households that is putting children at risk. But we're not brave enough to talk about that.
I would look at it differently. Our children are under more attack now than they've ever been. Of course, there's a dreaded internet and social media, but also there's an adult way in which we teach children. For instance, we call them young people, which suggests they're a distinct and separate set of people. They are not. They live and breathe as well as their families and parents do. I think we also are very reticent to criticise parents because we all know parenting is hard. I have two children at home. They run rings around me. But the piece is this. There's culture versus the law. And culture wins every time. If you have a culture that protects children, you have a culture that looks after the broader network of children you might come across, then you have better outcomes with children. And I'll say this to anybody listening now, would you challenge a teenager? And the point is, we have over years let our teenagers just become this strange, exotic, dangerous thing. I come from a community where old people would I remember being on a bus and having my feet on the chair and this old woman just staring in my face. Until I moved my feet, she sat down and she said, you know, what's your mum's name? And she sort of got into it with me. We wouldn't do that now because somewhere along the law, we've made children exotic, but also we've forgotten that we are adults and should treat them as children, which means to protect them, but also sometimes challenge them.
But this requires leadership, doesn't it? I've had a couple of guests on in the first hour who both said to me that over the last decade there have been immense cuts to things like social services and cuts to frontline public services, which have potentially all contributed to an overburdening of a system which is now clearly not working as well as it should. But like you said, when it comes to culture, we need role models, we need leadership, we need people at the top bringing back old-fashioned values, family values and talking tough. You're from the Conservative Party, the party supposedly of conservative values, small c conservative values. Where are they? Why is Boris Johnson not standing up in Parliament talking about this?
Let's break this down. So your former guests said it's about the state, it's about, not being enough money. Actually, they're wrong. That's part of the problem. We now have a group of people who think the state parent their children. We now have a group of people who think, well, if I say anything about what's going on next door, the state will spirit away those people's children, and I don't want to be a grass. Yes, money does help, but it's more than money. It's what you do with that money. You could give people £1 billion, it could be wasted, or something good could happen. And the other thing is, when you talk about role models, that is our other problem. We think footballers are role models. We think Richard Branson's role model. The first and primary and most important role model in your world should be your parents. There's an old British saying, you sort of grow up to be your parents. And as you go through that and you're middle age, you sort of appreciate the fact you're becoming your parents because you respected what they did. They had the authority in your home. They had the authority in your community. When you over-professionalise and when you parachute people in, you weaken communities because they send the responsibility elsewhere. So I think we have to be careful about how much we professionalise. And we also have to be a little bit more robust in what we ask parents to take responsibility for.
But, I mean, look, let's think about it. Say if, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister now, I would have no doubt that she'd have stood at that dispatch box and really laid down the law with an iron fist about declining moral standards and social standards in our community. Do you think that the current government sometimes look like they're having too much of a laugh to be actually pushing forward these critical messages?
I would say they'd get cancelled. If you stand up, well, I am a card-carrying Conservative, I go to church, I'm married, I've got 2 kids. If I say anything positive about that situation, I get cancelled. There's lots of people who benefit from weaker communities. I would tell anybody all day long, if you want to keep your children safe, there's a number of things you should do. Being married, like it or not, I know you can't make people stay together, but the children of married people do better. Less time in jail, less time in hospital, they make more money. It is a fact. Keep your children young. It's a fact. We let our children grow up too quickly. Anybody watching this now, ask themselves if they've let their children watch a movie, for instance, that they're underaged for. Now, it might not be a big thing with that one movie, but it puts an idea in your child's mind that they can push and challenge boundaries. Ask yourself, if you're a school governor, how your children relate to the teachers and do you intervene in that, or are you afraid of parents? We've set up a whole thing, not just the government, the council culture, everybody else has set up a thing where you cannot challenge anybody. And the worst, where that manifests itself worst is in the lives of our young people. They surveyed the young people of this country and they came bottom in Europe for happiness. They came second bottom in the world. And that says something about how the adults around them are operating. And I'd argue it's not a case of just going back to old-fashioned values. That would be useful. There is a case of taking some responsibility.
Now, very briefly, because we are sort of running out of time, but I must ask you, do you think that your party in government are going to do things, take those bold steps, such as putting porn behind at least age verification? Are they going to do it?
I really, really hope so. And I'll tell you something now, I'm one of the people in that party, the Conservative Party, who will be pushing for that. Because like I say, with sex, drugs and rock and roll, if you haven't had enough by the time you're 18, you can sit in your room and fill your head with it. But if you've had too much, we can't take it back. But what you have to do here, anybody watching this now, be you Conservative or not, you've got to support the government in taking these steps. Because the minute Boris stands up and says something like that, someone will try to cancel him. I know for a fact he'd like to have these things go forward. There's a number of people who would, but we have an avalanche of people who are against it.
Sean, thank you so much. He's got a majority and we need to see it happen, so we'll be waiting with bated breath. Lovely to have you in the studio.
And great to see you.
Thank you. Well, there's lots more on this after the break, so do stay with us. But first, here's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The next 24 hours sees significant changes take place with our weather. Initially, calm and chilly overnight, but then Storm Barra arrives on Tuesday morning, bringing a spell of disruptive wind and hill snow in some places. Any showers through the evening dying away, many places turning clearer and winds dying down. Under those clear skies with lighter winds, a widespread frost forms across central, northern and eastern parts of the UK. Temperatures in towns and cities down to -1 Celsius, in the countryside even lower than that. But it's the calm ahead of Storm Barra, because this is a rapidly deepening area of low pressure that hits the Republic of Ireland initially during the early hours of Tuesday before sending rain and gales into much of the rest of the UK. So soon enough it turns wet and windy across Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Some hill snowfall, western hills of Northern Ireland as well. That rain and wind move east through the day, followed by blustery showers, and the wind's really picking up. 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts in exposed western and eastern parts of the UK, 60 mile per hour wind gusts inland. But as well as the heavy rain and the strong wind, we're going to see a spell of hill snow. Northern England, much of central and southern Scotland, wet snow down to lower levels, but disruptive snow over the hills, blizzards and drifting of snow likely, and over some of the higher routes, 2 to 5 centimetres, and some of the higher spots of northern England and central southern Scotland, seeing 20 centimetres of snow building up. That's all followed by blustery showers, and Wednesday is another very unsettled day with Barra still centred over the UK. It is filling, so the wind's not quite as strong, but still the potential for gales around South Wales and southwest England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts accompanied by blustery showers. Many places seeing those showers come and go through Wednesday. Further showers, mainly in the east on Thursday, with brighter skies arriving in the west.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with the afternoon agenda here on GB News, and in a moment we'll be talking to the former Minister for Children about the review into the death of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. But first, it's the news headlines with Tamsin.
Thanks, Alex. Here are the latest headlines. The Education Secretary has announced a major investigation into the circumstances surrounding the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. Nadeem Sahawi told MPs all agencies who care for vulnerable children in Solihull will be reviewed. He says while the government can't legislate against evil, more must be done to stop it from happening again. Two former police officers have been jailed for 2 years and 9 months after sharing photos of murder victims in northwest London. PC Dennis Jaffa and PC Jamie Lewis took photos of Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry, then shared them on WhatsApp. The victims' family described them as a disgrace to the force and to mankind. Todon Primary School in Scotland has been forced to close for a week following a suspected outbreak of the Omicron variant. It comes after one of the AstraZeneca vaccine creators, Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, warned future pandemics could be more contagious and more lethal. She's also urging caution over the new COVID variant, which could be more resistant to both current vaccines and natural antibodies. Thousands of people still without power after Storm Arwen hit 10 days ago are now bracing themselves for more bad weather. The Met Office has warned Storm Barra will hit the UK tomorrow. Yellow wind warnings are in place across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Yellow warnings for snow have been issued for southern and western Scotland. Tesco warehouse workers and drivers are to stage a series of strikes in a dispute over pay. They're set to take industrial action from December the 16th and the 5 days leading up to Christmas. That's all for now. I'll bring you a full news update at the top of the hour.
A new scheme to tackle domestic abuse is being rolled out in the north of England for the first time. The Inspire to Change programme tries to get men to ditch the tough guy stereotypes and help them to cope with problems without turning to anger and aggression. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin spoke to South Yorkshire's Police and Crime Commissioner, Dr Alan Billings.
Dr Billings, thank you for joining us this morning. I guess just to begin with, what proportion of domestic abuse offenders are likely to take up this programme? Because it's quite reliant on men having the will to change, and obviously not all men may necessarily want to do that.
No, I'm not expecting really big numbers, but because, as you say, they have got to want to do this. And I think it takes a while before people realise that there's something about them that needs to change. So we've got to have willing people to do that. So I don't think it'll be significant numbers. Well, significant in the sense that these are people who, if we can get them to change their behaviour, that is significant.
And many people at home will say, why aren't South Yorkshire Police just arresting these men? South Yorkshire Police does seem to do better than the national average, but according to the data, it seems like it's pretty much 50-50 whether an arrest will be made for a domestic abuse crime. And I'm sure you'd agree that that's not good enough, is it?
Well, I think the police, we do encourage them to arrest, and certainly we want people to be arrested and removed from households if they're presenting a real challenge, a real threat to the people who are in that household. That may be partners, but it may also be children as well. So we want them arrested and removed as quickly as possible. That's why I say these people who will join this Inspire to Change programme are likely to be a very small number of people.
And you've touched on the numbers here, but there were almost 35,000 domestic abuse incidents in South Yorkshire in the year to March 2020. You've said the numbers won't be that high. Do you have a target for how much lower you expect that number to be going forward as a result of this scheme?
No, I don't think we have a target, because that would be wrong. Because if you had a target, then you might artificially get people to go on a course. We just want as many people as possible on the programme. And I think that if we're going to seriously tackle this question of violence against women and girls, then within the domestic setting, within the family setting, that's a key area. And if people can recognise that there is something about their behaviour, it's controlling, it's abusive. If they can recognise that, that's the first step we can have in them reducing that offensive, abusive behaviour. So it's an important and a challenging programme. It's funded partly by my office, but it's a partnership of all the local authorities in this area. That's Barnsley, Rotherham, Sheffield and Doncaster, a big partnership. And together, I think we can make a significant difference.
South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner Dr Alan Billings, thank you very much for joining us.
Still to come on the afternoon agenda, it will be time to hear what you think about our main subject of the day, which is, of course, at-risk kids. Are the authorities failing vulnerable children? First, it's time for the news headlines with Tamsin. Time for a break, in fact, not for the news headlines. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. We're going to cross straight now live to the Commons, where Health Secretary Sajid Javid is speaking.
I'm looking forward to our exchanges. Last week I paid tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Leicester South, and I do so again today, along with my honourable friends, the members for Ellesmere, Porton, Neston and Nottingham North, who did a magnificent job in the shadow health team. My right honourable friend took a constructive approach to the government's response to the pandemic, and I intend to continue in the same vein. COVID-19 is still with us, and with new variants presenting significant challenges to lives, livelihoods and our liberties. The goal must be to ensure that we can live with the virus through effective vaccines, treatments and common sense public health measures. In that spirit, can I welcome the announcements the Secretary of State has made today and join him in his call for everyone who is eligible to come forward and get the booster jab, as my right honourable and learned friend, the Leader of the Opposition, did just this morning. Vaccination remains the greatest tool we have in our fight against the pandemic. In order to achieve the government's overall target, they need to reach 500,000 booster vaccines a day. Labour called on the government to set the target. I believe they have, and we support it. And we desperately want the booster campaign to be successful. So can the Secretary of State today update us on when he expects to hit that target of 500,000 booster jabs a day? And can I ask when boosters will be rolled out to under 40s, and probably declare my interest in this, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I do. On the wider vaccine rollout, members across the House will have been frustrated and concerned with reports this weekend that too many hospital beds and resources are having to be diverted to those who have chosen not to receive the vaccine. With the pressures on the NHS this winter expected to reach unprecedented levels even before the emergence of Omicron, what is the Secretary of State's plan to persuade the 1 in 5 people who are eligible but not yet fully vaccinated to get the jab? The arguments in favour of receiving the vaccine are overwhelmingly strong. It is a safe and effective tool in our defence. So what research has the Secretary of State undertaken into the reasons for vaccine hesitancy, and what steps is he putting in place to put effective reassurance measures in place to encourage take-up, particularly among groups that are less likely to have taken up the vaccination and are disproportionately suffering with the virus? And can he update the House on the reasons for the slow progress in vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds? The initial target of offering all 12 to 15-year-olds the vaccine by October half-term has been missed, with current trends suggesting some teenagers won't receive the vaccine until February. So what's the Secretary of State's plan to speed this up? Madam Deputy Speaker, we want everyone to be able to enjoy Christmas this year. To make that happen, the government needs to bring forward the common sense measures which can limit the spread of the new variant while having a minimal impact on our lives, jobs and businesses, especially in the busy pre-Christmas trading period. I was pleased to see the Secretary of State and his right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, accept Labour's call for the reintroduction of pre-departure tests for those travelling to the UK. But given the likelihood of new variants, will the government now introduce, as a standard response to new variants overseas, introducing stronger border controls, testing and contact tracing so the government isn't again accused of locking the door after the horse has bolted? Can the Secretary of State explain why the window for pre-departure tests is 48 hours and not shorter? And can he act with his colleagues in government to address the racket of soaring testing costs and poor provision of hotel quarantine accommodation? Madam Deputy Speaker, SAGE recommended a year ago ventilation support for schools. The government's air purifiers in schools pilot isn't due to publish its full report until October next year. Meanwhile, a primary school in Paisley is today shut for a week following a suspected Omicron outbreak. In the past 2 weeks, the number of students missing school has increased by 62%, meaning disruption to their learning and an impact on their parents as they have to stay home with their children. Children have seen their education disrupted enough. So will he now roll out the ventilation support needed to protect our schools? Madam Deputy Speaker, we have one of the lowest levels of sick pay in Europe. Workers in low pay and insecure employment who contract COVID are still being put in the impossible position of choosing between going to work and feeding their family on one hand and staying at home and protecting our public health on the other. So can I ask the Secretary of State if the government will finally look again at increasing and expanding sick pay? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm sorry to have to end on this note, I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree with me that the effectiveness of the government's response to the pandemic and public compliance with the rules will depend on public confidence in those setting the rules. Residents in Ilford are this week being prosecuted for holding an indoor gathering of 2 or more people on the 18th of December 2020, and rightly so. Isn't it time that the government comes clean about the event in Downing Street on that same day, admit they broke the rules and apologise? Or does the Secretary of State believe, as the Prime Minister appears to, that it's one rule for them and another rule for everyone else?
Secretary of State.
First of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his support for these measures that I talked of in my statement. And I'm pleased to hear that the Leader of the Opposition has got his booster jab today, as I think also the Chief Executive of the NHS also received her booster jab today as well, along with thousands of many other people. And can I also thank him for his support, his general support for the booster programme, the importance of vaccines, the call that he's just made for more and more people to come forward. The booster programme itself is steaming ahead at a blistering pace. 2.6 million people across the UK were boosted last week. There's some 3.6 million people that are booked in to get their boost already. I think that's one of the highest numbers, probably is the highest number that we've seen certainly for boosters, and I'm confident that we are on track to meet our commitment to offer all adults across the UK a booster jab by the end of January. We are already far ahead of any other country in Europe, and when we achieve that by the end of January, we most certainly still will be. In terms of vaccination more generally, especially those people who haven't even yet taken up their offer of a first vaccine jab, the honourable gentleman is right to point to the importance of that. We estimate there's around some 5 million people across the UK that have yet to take up their offer of a jab. Our general vaccination rate across the population at over 88%, having had at least one jab over the age of 12, 88%, is one of the highest in Europe, but we do need to do even more to get to that 12%, that missing 12%. There's a huge amount of work that's gone on that, especially around communications, especially around dealing with misleading information on vaccines, but also by improving access. And we have seen in the last week, perhaps because of the concerns around the Omicron variant, more and more people coming forward for vaccinations the first time, and of course that is to be welcomed, and we will continue to build on that. The honourable gentleman also asked me about about responses to any potential future variants. I think it's reasonable to think there will be future variants, but we will reserve judgment on those until we come across such issues. And in any case, there will always be a balanced and proportional response based on what we know at that time. I don't think it would make sense to set out that response in advance. The honourable gentleman asked me about testing, the testing cost, whether PCR tests, lateral flow tests. We have removed, rightly so, I think over 100 providers from the government website in recent weeks. I think some 20 were removed this weekend for offering, for showing misleading prices, and we will continue to take a tough and hard line because no one, of course, should be misled on this, and the pricing and the availability should be absolutely clear. The honourable gentleman asked about ventilation in schools. I believe that my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, gave further information on that, on improvements that were being made. I believe he did that last week. On sick pay, I think it's important that we rightly have kept in place the access to sick pay from day one rather than what was there before the pandemic. And in terms of rules, of course, they should apply to everyone, regardless of who they are.
Chair of the Health Select Committee, Jeremy
Health
Hunt.
Secretary Sajid Javid, again addressing Parliament over COVID. Now, Nicola Sturgeon will face a court challenge over plans that would allow individuals to self-identify their gender in Scotland's 2022 census. The Fair Play for Women organisation has launched a judicial review in response to the decision, claiming that the guidance is unlawful and directly impacts the rights of women and girls because it's used to plan government policy. The guidance says if you are transgender, the answer you give can be different from what is on your birth certificate. You do not need a gender recognition certificate. Well, let's talk to the Director of Fair Play for Women, Dr. Nicola Williams, which is behind the push for the review. Nicola, why this review? Why is this so important?
Well, the census is the biggest and most expensive data collection exercise that there is. So, it's important that we get it right. And there are lots of things asked on the census. One of them is the question that is, what is your sex? And there's also a question now for transgender people asking, are you transgender? So we think that's great. 2 questions and an opportunity for trans people to register their identity in the census. But what we object to is that the Scottish Government is saying that transgender people can also answer the sex question with an identity. And we say, no, that's pointless. Sex and gender identity are 2 different things. Sex is about your body and it's about how you were born, and identity is how you feel inside. So don't use the sex question to collect data on identity. It's more important to collect data on sex that's accurate because we need to know who's male and who's female across the UK.
Now, whenever I have this conversation with people outside of work, and I know we have you on the show often to talk about this, especially the reaction from men, not that I'm pointing the finger of blame, so why does it matter? Oh, come on, does it really matter if a man decides that he's a woman? I mean, how does that really affect you? So can you help to explain how and why this does have real-world implications for women and girls?
Well, when it comes to data collection, we need to know who's male and who's female so that we can understand where inequality exists. So there are lots of times when an area is dominated by males. For example, most sex offenders are male. There are some careers where most of the people are male. And so there are very small numbers of females involved. And so if you start to collect data that's wrong, where just a few males are misclassified as female, it completely changes the female statistics. So if we look at how many sex offenders are in prison, there are 15,000 sex offenders in England and Wales. They're all male, bar 100 females. So if only 100 of those male sex offenders say they're female, suddenly you've doubled the number of female sex offenders. Well, of course, you haven't in reality. Half of them are male. So that's why small changes in data can really impact what we think and know about females. And that data is used to develop policy and policy for women and girls. Data is at the core of good policy making. So if you get that wrong, you can't make good laws and good policy.
Now, there'll be people out there, like me, I'm going to include myself in this, who'll say, well, this is just the thin end of a wedge as well. Once you give the green lights for anybody to say that they're a woman and use women's facilities, women's changing rooms, women's toilets, then we have a real problem on our hands. I'm assuming that you share that sentiment.
Well, yeah, because there are lots of areas in life where we like to separate males and females in changing rooms, in prisons, in refuges, all sorts of different areas, in sports, for example. So we need to know the difference between males and females and not pretend that some people who feel that they're female, and that's fine if they feel that way, that can be an identity, but we must still acknowledge that they are actually male. And they must be treated differently in policy. Because otherwise, if you allow some males into what we call a women-only space, it's no longer a women-only space, is it? You know, when I'm undressing in a changing room, if a male comes in, it doesn't really matter to me how that male identifies. I still feel that, you know, my privacy has been undermined. So it's important that we separate out identities from sex, because sex matters too in society. Yes, gender identity is important and we must respect that, and we must make sure trans people are safe and can not be discriminated against. But, you know, women matter too, sex matters too, and sometimes we have to say no. Males are not allowed.
And in terms of, there's always a backlash around this, isn't there? The trans lobby is extremely vocal, and every time a woman raises the issue and says, I'm not comfortable with the idea that anybody can just say I'm a woman and walk into single-sex spaces, we're often accused of drumming up hatred or mistrust against the trans community. How do you respond to that?
Standing up for women's rights is not transphobic. We all have our own needs in society, and women have our need. We have needs too. You know, we need to be safe. We need to have privacy. We need to have fairness in things like sports. So we have to be able to stand up for our rights. And sex-based rights matter to women and girls. And so for me, defending those, I'm not being transphobic. I'm just standing up for my rights. So, you know, the idea that I'm transphobic it is nonsense. This is just women standing up for what we believe and what we need in society.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Dr. Nicola Williams, great to have you back on. We'll keep pushing on this. Now, National Records for Scotland have so far refused to withdraw the guidance, insisting it is not unlawful and ignoring the findings of the High Court earlier this year. It says NRS consider that the published guidance relating to Scotland's Census 2022 in its current terms is not unlawful, and that the section relating to the question of what is your sex will not be withdrawn and reworded. The interim conclusion of the High Court of England and Wales was in respect of the census in England and Wales only and was not binding on Scotland. Good luck north of the border. Now that we've heard what our guests had to say on today's big topic of the day, of course, which is at-risk children, it is time for you, the viewer, to have the final word. And earlier, we asked you if you think authorities are failing children, and the result is resounding. 95% of you say yes, they are. Let's have a little deeper dive into some of your thoughts on this matter. One viewer says, my granddaughter was hit regularly by her mother. My son reported this to social services. It took 2 years before the authorities agreed that she should live with my son, but then still insisted that my granddaughter still had to see her mother at weekends, even though she doesn't want to. One of you asks, how is it that we spend $13 billion on child welfare and there are 100,000 children living in poor circumstances? Well, it's hardly the fault of the government. Perhaps there is something fundamentally wrong in the way that many live their lives. It's an interesting thought. We've been trying to probe a bit more into that throughout the course of this programme. Finally, another viewer says, this is not an isolated incident. A few years ago, the exact same happened to another child, and the words used were lessons to be learned. Well, it seems like we're still in the process of learning critical lessons. Let me remind you of some of those statistics. NSPCC estimate around 63 children a year, at least those aged under 15, are killed as a result of neglect and abuse by those closest to them. 400,000 children at one time are known to social services, with 52,000 on the serious concerns list. That's with imminent threats to their health and well-being, if not their lives. And 200,000 child protection investigations are happening in the UK now every year. Do we have a problem? You bet you we do. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Join me again from tomorrow from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, of course, it's Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. Do stay tuned and I'll catch up with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The next 24 hours sees significant changes take place with our weather. Initially, calm and chilly overnight, but then Storm Barra arrives on Tuesday morning, bringing a spell of disruptive wind and hill snow in some places. Any showers through the evening dying away, many places turning clearer and winds dying down. Under those clear skies with lighter winds, a widespread frost forms across central, northern and eastern parts of the UK. Temperatures in towns and cities down to -1 Celsius, in the countryside even lower than that. But it's the calm ahead of Storm Barra, because this is a rapidly deepening area of low pressure that hits the Republic of Ireland initially during the early hours of Tuesday before sending rain and gales into much of the rest of the UK. So soon enough it turns wet and windy across Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Some hill snowfall, western hills of Northern Ireland as well. That rain and wind move east through the day, followed by blustery